Hi guys, coming on again today on my unwatched video radio show here. Um, I wanted to talk about capitalism and specifically not so much capitalism because that's a bit more general than framing the topic of the video in terms of wanting to talk about capitalism is obscuring, I think, obscuring my point, the points I wanted to make into useless generality. Um, I don't necessarily want to talk about capitalism specifically, rather the profit motive, and perhaps the anthropological value of the profit motive within a context of a capitalist economy. Um, and I have made it. I've in a previous video, I've already talked about how I would simultaneously identify as a socialist and an individualist, and how those are compatible. Um, but ultimately, to say that I identify that way is not to say that I deny the value of capitalism and the potential benefits of a capitalist system, specifically a system that incentivizes the profit motive to make profit, to generate wealth, and to generate measurable capital. And so, yeah, I certainly don't deny the value of capitalism. It would be very difficult. I don't even think Marx denied the value of capitalism. I think even in I'm not sure what his seminal work is. I think it's Capital. But in any case, from what I understand, I've never read it from start to finish. Even if I'm not even sure if I have read it. I probably picked it up. Um, I probably picked it up at one point in my youth and read a couple of, maybe a chapter or two. I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember. But from what I understand about capital and Marx's take on capitalism is that it's not necessarily entirely critical of capitalism. And I think Marx, despite his ultimate rejection of the traditional capitalist system and laissez-faire economics and more libertarian and socially or fiscally conservative economic theory about the role of government in the economy and economic regulation and all of this. You know, he's not entirely critical of it, and it's if capitalism didn't have some value in some way, then we wouldn't it, we wouldn't it wouldn't be an established system. We wouldn't rely upon it. We wouldn't construct our economies that way. If it didn't have value, it wouldn't exist. And so, um, if it didn't have some kind of value, right? I mean, I'm not talking about ultimate value. It may have proximate value. It may ultimately produce a less ideal human society to structure the economy that way, and to adhere to more rigid, um, uh, uh, I guess, a more rigid ideology of capitalism. Ultimately, it may not be. It, it it may historically have been advantageous up to this point. We may be reaching a point where it's more feasible for us to. I believe that Marx, although I would want to confirm this. So Marx's specific feelings on capitalism. Um, all right, so he is a he. So Marx, according to Lumen Learning, an article by Lumen Learning on economic systems and sociology, describes Marx's feelings on capitalism this way. Karl Marx saw capitalism as a progressive historical stage that would eventually stagnate due to internal contradictions to be followed by socialism, right? Marxists define capital a social economic relation between people. In this sense, they seek to abolish capital, right? Um, but he believed that it had value, that it does have value. It is not without value. Um, and that it's some stage that we're moving through economically toward more of an ideal economic system. So he viewed capitalism as having value in that sense. And as I said, if it didn't have some value, it wouldn't exist. If it was totally without value, it wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have adopted it as our primary mode of operating economically. Um, so, regardless, my discussion is less on generalities about the value of capitalism and what it is and defining it. I'm more focused on the profit motive and the benefits of incentivizing that motive and um, creating so I was thinking about Apple, for instance, and Apple computers, which historically was the central alternative to Microsoft, and to the uh, computer products that had existed before. And so, yeah, Apple, for instance, right? So each year, right, or each maybe not a year, each every 2 years, some unit of time, Apple will um, produce, um, I guess, a kind of blanketed upgrade in, or at least strive for making their technology, their phones, their computers, any one of their products more more effective at serving their purpose and more intuitive to use and better battery life and better processing capacity and Apple is constantly striving for and all companies in a sense, if capitalism is working, right, the free market economy is working, are constantly striving for this level of optimization, right, some level of optimization, so that they can continue to advertise their products effectively, continue to generate profit that way. And if Apple simply wasn't optimizing at the necessary rate, right? They weren't producing marketable optimizations in their technology, their profit margins would fall, right? They wouldn't generate as much wealth for themselves. And so the ability of individuals to generate measurable capital, to generate value, to generate wealth, all of that spurs on some level, or can be viewed as, it may not do it universally in every context and with respect to every company. It may happen that you have a monopoly and competition is absent, but the value of a competitive economy is that companies are constantly trying to outcompete each other with respect to their prices and the quality of their products. So, price and quality is something that organizations, companies, and businesses are constantly striving to optimize and so as to generate further profit. And um, without, so in this sense, a uh, incentivizing that motive seems to have seems to be a good thing, maybe at this point anyway, in terms of, and again, Marx didn't recognize the value of capitalism as one of humanity's historical stages that will eventually give way to, and he may be right. I mean, he's a historical progressionist and very much like Hegel, and um, he saw it as just one stage in the development of mankind and the development of economics and of providing government services and et cetera, and of advancing the technology of production and so yeah, he doesn't deny the value of it, and even as I identify more as a socialist, I also recognize the value of it. We could probably integrate some sort of, as China has done to some extent, we could probably integrate the two systems into one, exploit the benefits of a competitive economy while simultaneously providing for human need and human want through a kind of socialist mechanism. With regard to the profit motive, it's undeniable that, at least with respect to, um, well, it could be deniable, right? I mean, there's no doubt that it may produce optimization in some sense, depending on how you define optimization, in the technologies, in the tech products that, for instance, Apple or Microsoft offers. Um, Depending on how you define optimization, and there does seem to be so there does seem to be a relationship between the incentivization in a free market economy of the profit motive, the ability to generate capital, to generate wealth, to generate value, to generate profit, and and the need for companies to outcompete each other, and the desire of those companies to optimize their products so as to generate more profit. And so, in this sense, incentivizing that motive can produce, or at least can be seen as producing, a great deal of good in terms of raw optimization of technology. Um, now, yeah, so in that sense, the profit motive, incentivizing that motive, at least at this point in human history, does seem to be not entirely a bad thing. Um, and yeah, and I think that that's something that Marx recognized, and um, which is why doing away with the incentivization of that motive entirely would be difficult to do. But this is one way of looking at capitalism and looking at the profit motive and the relationship between the profit motive and technological advancement and product optimization as companies try to outcompete each other in a competitive economy. And and so it's very difficult for one to take a position of complete opposition toward capitalism in general. And again, once we start speaking in generalities like this, everything becomes somewhat obscure, and very valid points and observations uh, lost to the tendency to speak in unproductive generalities. Regardless, I think I'm making a specific statement about the value of the profit motive with the relationship to technological and product optimization, at least at this point in human history. And I don't think that it would necessarily ever be a good thing to completely do away with that motive and the incentive structures that are in place that drive that motive to then produce optimization. Um, I I think at one point we may reach a stage of technological development where further optimization is simply, we may reach a threshold, a ceiling, right? So an optimization ceiling where we've come far enough, and the competitive economy no longer serves its one could be said an anthropological function of driving up the optimization of technology for the sake of producing a profit. And there may reach a point where technology reaches a kind of zenith where this the need for the incentivization of the profit motive becomes moot, and is no longer a need. Regardless, one it's very difficult for, and I would love, I don't know, this is just how I've thought about it, and why there is an implicit approval of capitalist systems and the free market economy, and I think this may be one of the reasons, one of the more technical reasons that uh, that this kind of system is valued. But again, it's not to say that it would preserve its value across time infinitely, right? It's only to say that at this stage in human history, for the sake of our technological advancement, it may be a system that we need to preserve for the sake of that advancement, if we want technology to continue to progress at the startling rate that it has since the since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment. And as I said, we may reach a ceiling, if there even is a ceiling. Um, but there may come a point where we could perhaps, um, build off of the technology that all of the goods, all of the value that capitalism at one point produced, the free market economy and the competitive dynamic one point produced, and move beyond it and transcend it in some way. But at this point in human history, it's locally valuable. It's time locally valuable, and I think, at least in this point, to drive forward, right? I mean, the freight train of technological advancement, it may be beneficial to continue the incentivization of that motive, at least in my view, taking a longer view of both history, the future, and of time. Um, but as I said, we may reach a point where where the competitive dynamic is not perfect either. It's not to say that people will always purchase the most well optimized products, and that people will always be able to discriminate between the good products and the bad products, and hence it could just as easily produce a dynamic where bad technologies are then purchased at alarming rates, and that only fuels the advancement of bad technology and unoptimized, uninspired technology. But on balance, I think that the average person is smart enough to recognize what optimization is and what a truly good product happens to be. And if that weren't the case, I think we wouldn't have come so far technologically, regardless. So, um, I want to chew on that statement a bit more. Um, yeah. Um, regardless, these are my thoughts on capitalism and the value of the profit motive, which I'm only saying is valuable in a time local sense. But again, the value of that competitive dynamic may diminish in the future. There may be some ceiling that we may reach where we've effectively provided for human want and need, and we no longer need that system to produce the same benefit because at that point the benefit would be superfluous, unnecessary. But perhaps nourishing that profit motive and creating the conditions to spur on the advancement, the technological advancement that it may bring, may be a good thing, at least at this point in human history. In any case, thank you for watching.